Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order. I want to welcome you to the February 20th Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to obviously first recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Good morning. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, would you please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, I will call on those who have signed up to the podium to address Council. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, we have none, correct?
No late items, Your Worship.
I would ask for a motion for approval of the agenda as circulated. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Martinman. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. We have no presentations this morning, but we do have a number of reports. So the 2019 Finance and Audit Committee key date calendar. Ms. Gurry, over to you.
Thank you, Worship and Council. So the purpose of this report is to provide for your consideration the key date calendar for the Finance and Audit Committee. And this calendar will be for meetings to be held in the SARC boardroom rather than here. And there's reasons for costs laid out in the report. And the purpose of continuing on with these meetings, I think Council has relayed, is to have an avenue for those delegations and money items to have an avenue before flowing through to Council. So that's Your Worship.
Thank you. Any questions before the motion to approve the calendar?
Not a question so much as just an expression of gratitude. Saving $1,300 per meeting, I think, is pretty wonderful. So thank you. That's not something I would have looked for, but it's nice to see. Thanks.
Motion to Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion? All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. The next item is the request for additional funding for the Bastion Street Parkade infrastructure. Chief Fry. Hope she's not caught in the snow.
She might want to know. I was speaking with her this morning. She was coming to the meeting, so I'm not sure why she's not here. Maybe there's a fire.
Would be a logical explanation.
Your Worship, I would suggest maybe if Council, by consent, would move this to the end of the reports, and it could be dealt with after the rest of them.
Well, I won't even necessarily move to the end of reports if we don't need to keep Chief Fry here all morning. How about until Chief Fry arrives? So moved. Yes. Councillor Thorpe. By consent, everyone? Done. Thank you. On to the downtown metered parking. That was to be introduced by Mr. Sims, but I think we've got a stand-in this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Your Worship. I'll just briefly introduce this. So, as Council is aware, late last year there was a bit of vandalism on the meter parking heads downtown. So there was, I think, around 30% of it were damaged, so they had to be removed. When they're removed, parking essentially becomes unregulated, and that's created a number of problems for businesses. There's a lack of turnover of parked vehicles and so on. As part of our downtown mobility study this year, we're going to be conducting an extensive study on parking rates and so on. So the plan is that there would be a business case developed after that, but implementation likely wouldn't be for a year or two. So in the meantime, we need to put some signs up to regulate parking, make sure there's some turnover, and this report requests some allocation funding to make that happen.
Questions? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I have a few questions here. Will the areas that we're putting the signs up be monitored by bylaws and tickets enforced? I'm guessing it's like you're given 2 hours parking free or something like that?
As far as I know, it's 2-hour parking, and yes, it will
Okay. And do we know what our expected losses on revenue are for the areas that have been damaged, or what were we making off of those areas prior to the damage?
I believe I asked that question earlier. I believe we don't have those numbers yet.
Don't have, okay. I know that we're going to be doing this study, and I was wondering, instead of putting up signs, that we just put up the parking kiosks, similar to what we have in other places in Nanaimo, where you just put in your license plate number and you can pay for as long as you want. And with the idea that even though we're probably going to have the study, that's probably where most municipalities are moving towards. So why don't we just do that now? And then if for whatever reason we decide not to do it in the future, we can just unbolt the thing and move it somewhere else. Is that considered an option? Because then at least we're going to get in the revenue again for the street as opposed to just fines?
It's a good question. I don't know what the timeline would be to be able to implement a system like that. So I'd have to get back to you on the details of why that would take. I'm not sure how long that would take. So I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, if you could, I just thought we're probably going to go that way anyway. We'll just buy them and bolt them to the ground. But I don't know all the details in doing that, but you can buy them off the internet, I found out last night. I have one other, it's mostly, it's a request more than anything else, and I brought some show and tell, if I can be indulged. So we're going to be cutting off the parking meters at ground level, I'm assuming. Correct? Yeah. So can we leave 4 of them on each block and weld circles to them so they kind of look like this, so that we can attach bikes to them, because there are no bike stands on any of those streets. So that would be allowed. I mean, the sort of the infrastructure is already there in terms of the post. It would just be required getting either some sort of apparatus strapped to it so you can attach a bike chain to it.
Through your worship, Councillor Bonner, one of the things we have in the budget this year is actually a small grant that's available for businesses to apply and get like end of trip facilities for bicycles. So basically like bike racks installed outside the business on a street front. And the location would have to be sort of in consultation with the city to be a suitable location for a bike. I'm not sure that like a meter kiosk would have to be a suitable location necessarily. Maybe not. It's something that we could look at to see if there's an opportunity there. So I'll mention it back to my staff and see if there's a possibility for that.
And it wasn't so much the meter kiosk, it was the pipes that are coming out of the ground. We just weld something onto every 7th one or something like that, just so there's a place you can attach your bike to. Yeah.
Maybe an opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Turley.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to staff, is there, under the budget implications of this, is there any need for extra bylaw staff? So is there any need for extra bylaw staff for checking? In other words, are the current parking patrol people going to be adequate to look after the timing of people who are parking over their time, or is that a non-issue?
Morning, Chief Fry.
There's no additional staff required
Thank you.
to maintain this. Council has funded 2 extra positions for this year, so those will be adequate to maintain the parking.
Thank you.
Can we have the motion now?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Seconded, moved by Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. We'll go back to Chief Fry now and request for additional funding, Bastion Street Parkade infrastructure.
First of all, my apologies for being late. I went to another location. So this request is for the Bastion Street Parkade. What we've been doing in recent years is making sure that we're looking after that capital asset insofar as maintaining the concrete strand or the stranding in it, which will help to keep the concrete and the longevity of the parkades for the city. The reason why we're doing it now is what we found is over several other years we hadn't been maintaining them, so that's why these higher costs have come out in the last few years. But as such, all funding for maintaining our parkades comes out of our parking reserves. We have completed 2 phases of a parking strand or critical infrastructure of they call it a post-tension strand construction, and honestly, it's not my area of expertise, but I do rely heavily on our parks, our facility staff that have been managing this and running with these projects as well. We've completed 2 of the 3 projects. It was a 3-year project to complete so we weren't doing it all at once to spread it out. And the final funding, our RFP came back and it was over budget, what we had put aside for it through increased labor costs. With the addition, we'd already spent $10,000, just over $10,000 on this final stage. And we are requesting or requiring an additional $136,100 to complete the required scope of work that was put before council previously. And this will complete the final phase of the Bastion Street Parkade as far as the tension strand construction. It's included in the report, and we're asking for Finance and Audit to approve it, and it'll be coming out of the parking reserves.
Councillor Thorpe, then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'll support the staff recommendation when it's on the floor or on the table. But I do have a question, and I don't know that Chief Fry can answer it today, but I'm curious about the expected life of this piece of aging infrastructure. And I'm just curious what we are forecasting for end of life and possible replacement cost and possible expansion of the parkade, which I personally think is needed. So I don't know if you have that information, Chief Fry, but if somebody can supply it, I'd be happy in the future.
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, I'm going to ask my esteemed colleague, Mr. Art Groot, to come up and.
Morning, Council. Yeah, so my name is, through your worship, my name is Art Groot, and I work in the Parks Department, but we have a facilities section that assists the other departments throughout the organization in regard to capital planning, capital projects. And so this is a great example of us working together with Nanaimo Fire Rescue parking bylaw in regard to the parkades. Specifically to the question, I can't give you a life expectancy based on the report, but I can find that out from our consultants, RJC, in regard to what this upgrade / renewal of the Petrie strands does for life expectancy. So I can absolutely get that back to you, for sure. Mr. Groot. Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. Do we know how much we charge for parking in that parkade? Or I guess the other question I had is how much would we get from that parkade on a yearly basis?
I do not have that information at hand, but I do know that in all of our parkades in town, we're sitting at almost capacity on monthly rentals, but we'll be able to get that information and report it back through council.
What I was looking at is we're taking better part of, I think, $370,000 out of reserves for this. Is there any plans to look at having the users of this parkade put that money back in the reserves by increasing fees? Which is probably not going to get me a lot of friends.
At this point in time, I do know that with our real estate division, they've been helping work on some of the funding formulas for the parkades. but we have not looked at increasing it for that specific parkade to offset this project at this time. If it's council's desire for us to do that, it's definitely something we can look at.
One other follow-up of that. Do we know if our parking study coming up this year is going to be looking at that?
It is not included. Oh, it is included
Seen
in
a
it.
nod back there. Okay,
Yes, it is.
thank you.
If I could comment, on the financial side of this, in the reserves comments, we can certainly come back to you. We're planning in this session on the 11th of March, which will go through all the reserves in any event, so I'm sure we could give more information about the fiscal reality of all the parking garages and how that relates to the reserve funds and that type of thing. And then, as has been mentioned, we are doing a building review, comprehensive building audit for our entire range of buildings in the organization and owned by the city. So that will furnish us with life expectancies and the you know, the whole programming that would be required to extend the life of those types of buildings. So that study is actually underway right now, and I assume that it includes parking garages. But certainly, I think the financial questions that you're asking on this particular thing could be diverted to that, hopefully that reserve conversation. As part of that, we'll be ready for that on the 11th.
Thank you.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to, through you to Councillor Bonner, let you know about rates, because I just looked it up. I knew it was in the Traffic and Highways Bylaw 5000. And the daily 24-hour rates for the Bastion are $9. And you can find all of the different rates in the bylaw. And monthly for unreserved at the Bastion is $75, and reserved is $90 for the monthly rates, just for your information.
Thank you. I might say for myself, and it's an age thing, having remembered the Royal Theatre, which used to be on site, and I'm looking at Councillor Turley for confirmation, I appreciate how old that structure is, and for me it was always the way to measure the success of downtown revitalization was how far you had to drive down if you started at the top till you could find a parking spot. So it is reflective of improvements downtown, but I am very mindful of the comments made by Councillor Thorpe around this piece of aging infrastructure. And having had my law office near that site for 20-plus years now and seen the significant number of times there have been repairs and repairs and repairs, I think there's a certain interest, and I'll look around the table to see if anyone nods the other way, to perhaps look at what the costs are. And also consider, I believe that site is probably on bedrock or close to it as opposed to fill, but I'm not sure, which could present some tremendous engineering difficulties, I appreciate. But it is, by our calculations, what, 27 plus 19, 46 years old now. I just throw it out there for consideration. Does someone care to make the motion now respecting the approval of funds? Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion on this? All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Fry. The next is road safety funding allocation.
As I'm sure Council is aware, the city has a number of crosswalk locations where we have pedestrian flashers. That's where the pedestrians push the button and they get a flashing signal that enhances their visibility to motorists and so on. Typically in any given year, we install 1 or 2 of those on a priority basis around the city. With this report, we have an opportunity to receive grant funding to get 3 additional locations installed. And so this report essentially is asking council to allocate that funding to these next 3 locations, and we can accelerate them.
Councillor Martman first, then Councillor Gesselbrock.
I wanted to move the motion, the staff recommendation, and I think it's awesome that we've got the funding, the majority of it, from ICBC.
Should we get a seconder? Councillor Turley. Any discussion? All those in favour? Sorry, Councillor Bonner.
Thank
Pardon
you.
me.
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of traffic calming, would it be a good idea or not a good idea to, like, say, like at Hammond Bay, is putting a raised crosswalk there with lights, just to slow traffic down a little bit, or is that just dangerous?
So raised crosswalks are a problem on transit routes because pedestrians or passengers on buses don't like to have that vertical disruption. It's also not good on like routes that could get like truck traffic and so on. So generally we have guidelines around where we install certain types of traffic calming. So like speed humps or raised crosswalks and so on. Typically we wouldn't install those on the major road network. We reserve those to things like neighborhood collectors and so on.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? The motion? Sorry, yes, you did. Yes, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. The next item is the quarterly purchasing report, single and sole source instances of non-compliance purchases and purchases in excess of $250,000. Ms. Mercer, Ms. Rushton.
Good morning. The purpose of this report is to provide information to Council in regards to the city's procurement policy. This report only contains single and sole source purchases and awards in excess of $250,000. I am pleased to report that there are no policy non-compliance items on this report.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'm still on. Just one quick question is just for item number 2246 by BSM Technologies is continuation of the city's GPS monitoring software. What does that do? Anybody know?
So we have items on our vehicles so that we can track how and where and when these vehicles are gone, what route they have followed. Instrumental in us being able to track, particularly in the recent snow event, where the trucks have gone, where they've salted, where they've brined, where they've laid, what routes they have followed. Should there be any complaints from local residents, we can actually track back to see how long ago the truck was there and what they've done on that route.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions? The motion? Or do you have a question?
I have a question, yeah.
Please, Councillor
with regard to the file number 2242 with the road salt, is that a fixed figure every 2 years, or does it go up and down depending on the volume of salt that's used?
We secured a rate for the full year, so that will so that we are assured of what we're paying this year. Unfortunately, though, that will be up to negotiation for next year.
Okay. So if we don't get any snow next year, then...
Oh, yeah, then we're golden.
Okay.
Obviously not a child's perspective. Councillor Martman. Moved. Seconded, Councillor. Councillor Turley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Very much. Excuse me. The next is automated solid waste collection equipment financing. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Included in the 2019 to 2023 financial plan that was adopted on January 14th was the purchase of a new garbage truck to be in service in 2020 to address growth. The funding of the garbage truck is short-term borrowing through the MFA equipment financing program. And because of the lead time on acquiring the vehicle, we need to go out and purchase it now. So as part of that process, we need to apply for the MFA equipment borrowing. And as part of that application, we need a council resolution authorizing that borrowing. So that's what this report is for the committee to recommend to council that they endorse the resolution as stated.
Councillor Turley first, then Councillor Bonner.
Your worship, you want to move it first and I'll ask the question afterwards? Doesn't matter.
If you're asking questions or report, we typically do that first.
Ask the questions. Okay, thank you.
Your meeting, though.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, your worship, through to Ms. Mercer, in the background, there's a note here of the sanitation department is also acquiring a used automated garbage truck in 2019. Is that part of the borrowing, or how is that funded?
No, that is the borrowing, as outlined in this report, is strictly for the new automated vehicle. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the funding is for the new one. Sanitation user fees is the funding source for the used vehicle.
Okay, so basically, I'm sort of wondering, I guess this is just in background information, so it's not part of the motion for this used one, so.
Sorry, what was the question?
Under the background,
Yep.
there's a reference to a used automated garbage truck at the end of the second paragraph under background, and I'm just wondering if it's not part of the motion.
It was just to make council aware that that is also part of their implementation plan over the next year.
And do I dare ask where the funding for that is coming from?
It's the sanitation user fees. Sanitation user fees is funding that because it's not as expensive as a brand new vehicle.
Thank you.
Motion, Councillor Bonner.
Motion to accept.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion, any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. No other business, Ms. Mercer, Ms. Goury, sorry.
You can start till 10.
Well, we might have a question, but I don't think so. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Thorpe. In discussion, all those in favor, motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.